The Miseducation of the Negro. Chapter 1. The Seat of the Trouble. The educated Negroes have the attitude of contempt toward their own people because in their own as well as in their mixed schools, Negroes are taught to admire the Hebrew, the Greek, the Latin, and the Teuton, and to despise the Negro. Of the hundreds of Negro high schools recently examined by an expert in the United States Bureau of Education, only 18 offer a course taking up the history of the Negro, and in most of the Negro colleges and universities where the Negro is thought of, the race is studied only as a problem or dismissed as of little consequence. For example, an officer of a Negro university, thinking that an additional course on the Negro should be given there, called upon a Negro director of philosophy of the faculty to offer such work. He promptly informed the other officer that he knew nothing about the Negro. He did not go to school to waste his time that way. He went to be educated in a system which dismissed the Negro as a non-entity. At a Negro summer school 2 years ago, a white instructor gave a course on the Negro using for his text a work which teaches that whites are superior to the blacks. When asked by one of the students why he used such a textbook, the instructor replied that he wanted them to get their point of view. Even schools for Negroes, then, are places where they must be convinced of their inferiority. The thought of the inferiority of the Negro is drilled into him in almost every class he enters and in almost every book he studies. If he happens to leave school after he masters the fundamentals, before he finishes high school or reaches college, he will naturally escape some of this bias and may recover in time to be of service to his people. Practically, all of the successful Negroes in this country are of the uneducated type or that of Negroes who have had no formal education at all. The large majority of the Negroes who have put on the finishing touches of our best colleges are all but worthless in the development of their people. If after leaving school they have the opportunity to give out to Negroes what traducers of the race would like to have it learned, such persons may thereby earn a living at teaching or preaching what they have been taught, but they never become a constructive force in the development of the race. The so-called school then becomes a questionable factor in the life of this despised people. As another has well said, to handicap a student by teaching him that his black face is a curse and that his struggle to change his condition is hopeless is the worst sort of lynching. It kills one's aspirations and dooms him to vagabondage and crime. It is strange then that the friends of truth and the promoters of freedom have not risen up against the present propaganda in the schools and crushed it. This crusade is much more important than the anti-lynching movement because there will be no lynching if it did not start in the schoolroom. Why not exploit, enslave, or exterminate a class that everybody is taught to regard as inferior? To be more explicit, we may go to the seat of the trouble. Our most widely known scholars have been trained in universities outside of the South. Northern and Western institutions, however, have had no time to deal with matters which concern the Negro especially. They must direct their attention to the problems of the majority of their constituents, and too often they have stimulated their prejudices by referring to the Negro as unworthy of consideration. Most of what these universities have offered as language, mathematics, and science may have served a good purpose, but much of what they have taught as economics, history, and literature, religion, and philosophy is propaganda, and can't that involve a waste of time and misdirected the Negroes thus trained? And even in the certitude of science or mathematics, it can be unfortunate that the approach to the Negro has been borrowed from a foreign method. For example, the teaching of arithmetic in the 5th grade in a backward county in Mississippi should mean one thing in the Negro school and a decidedly different thing in the white school. The Negro children, as a rule, come from the homes of the tenants and peons who have to migrate annually from plantation to plantation, looking for light which they have never seen. The children from the homes of the white planters and merchants live permanently in the midst of calculations, family budgets, and the like, which enable them sometimes to learn more by contact than the Negro can acquire in school. Instead of teaching such Negro children less arithmetic, they should be taught much more of it than the white children, for the latter attended a graded school consolidated by free transportation when the Negroes go to one-room rented hovels to be taught without equipment and by incompetent teachers educated scarcely beyond the 8th grade. In schools of theology, Negroes are taught the interpretation of the Bible, worked out by those who have justified segregation and winked at the economic debasement of the Negro, sometimes almost to the point of starvation. Deriving their sense of right from this teaching, graduates of such schools can have no message to grip the people whom they have been ill trained to serve. Most of such miseducated ministers, therefore, preach to benches, while illiterate Negro preachers do the best they can in supplying the spiritual needs of the masses. In the schools of business administration, Negroes are trained exclusively in the psychology and economics of Wall Street and are therefore made to despise the opportunities to run ice wagons, push banana carts, and sell peanuts among their own people. Foreigners who have not studied economics but have studied Negroes take up this business to grow rich. In schools of journalism, Negroes are being taught how to edit such metropolitan dailies as the Chicago Tribune and the New York Times, which would hardly hire a Negro as a janitor. And when these graduates come to the Negro weeklies for employment, they are not prepared to function in such establishments, which to be successful must be built upon accurate knowledge of the psychology and philosophy of the Negro. When a Negro has finished his education in our schools, then he has been equipped to begin the life of an Americanized or Europeanized white man. But before he steps from the threshold of his alma mater, he is told by his teachers that he must go back to his own people from whom he has been estranged by a vision of ideas in which his disillusionment he will realize that he cannot attain. Welcome back to Breakdown Friday. Joseph Ward, Patrick Irvin, Professor Carl Tone Jones. And as you can see by the clip, we are diving into, and it's the first section of chapter 1 of The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. And I wrote, as always, we write down some notes as the video goes. I chose this clip because of a lot of the things that Carter G. Woodson was talking about. Of course, we've covered these things in past breakdowns, but I wanted to kind of take a deep dive into the inferiority complex. But I like how he's digging into how this inferiority complex is taught to us, but also how it manifests itself even in the eyes, or how it manifests itself, and it can be masked even by those who we would see as ultra successful, because he's getting into talking about how a group of educated people can't really help us get to the finish line. And so the chapter 1 is actually, the title of it, chapter 1 is the seat of the table. Right, and the seat of the table. One of the things he was getting into is the black inferiority. So, PC, man, this right down your alley. So let's get into this black inferiority, because and you can reference for what you remember in the book, but let's get into this black inferiority. Kind of like let's break down first what black inferiority is, and then get into how Dr. Carter G. Woodson is talking about how it was, how it is taught through the education system and reinforced through the society.
Well, I think, just in layman's terms, the black inferiority complex is seeing yourself as less than because you're not white. And it's like racial envy. You see white people as the standard barometer, the ruler. One of the things we talked about last week was the fact that most black people look at each other as being niggas. And most black people look at themselves through the lens of white folks. And that is, where this becomes in, so the academics believe that they are the exceptions to the rule. Those who become financially stable or financially in a socially economically in one of those higher classes, they actually see themselves as not being as black as us, and actually seeing themselves as being honorary white. I'll never forget watching the post game show with Charles Barkley on one of those networks, and I think it was about, we were talking about at that time, that was Trayvon Martin, the Mike Brown's situation, Eric Gardner situation was going viral, and he said that he was pointing to himself and other rich black people, and he said, when you're rich and black, you really don't, you sort of like elevate past race. You're not necessarily seen as being black anymore. You're seen as being honorary white because of your status, your wealth and your status. And That's how a lot of academics think. I mean, think about the conversation that we have about the high value man or the educated woman. And when you think about those conversations, a lot of those conversations derive around this is the status quo of how black people live. But when you look at it, you're talking about maybe the top 5 to 6% of both black men and black women who live there. But that's where the conversation is because they don't even acknowledge the brothers and sisters who are still struggling to just make ends meet or just struggling to get by.
Right.
And
The average person doesn't exist.
right, invisible. And so, and quite honestly, they probably do wish that the average black people just wander off into the wilderness, never to be seen or heard from again.
Right.
So, so in a nutshell, that's how we see. I see that. And then there's this, there's this distinction that uh black people suffer from, and this is one of the reasons why I think we weren't able to hold on to those black boom towns that developed out of the Reconstruction era. Because when you looked at those towns, they were very successful, but they were emulating the white town. If the white man had a theater, now we want a theater. If the white man had a hospital that was geared a certain way, we wanted to have that. If they had a bus company, we wanted a bus company. But also, if a white man had wait staff, if they had waiters, or if they had maids, if they had butlers, now we want butlers and we want maids. And so when you look at that, they just basically they were carbon copies of the white community, and it goes back to um, W.E.B. Du Bois, who actually was a protege of J.D. Rockefeller. And it was one of those things where you create, especially when you talk about the talented 10th and from what his vision of what the talented 10th was supposed to be and what it actually became.
It was taken from a white man as well.
Right. And there you go. So, everything that black people have done to this point is to get to this status of white in this country. Well, I'm not going to say everything, but when you start talking about those who consider themselves in the elite of black people, that's been their yardstick, and that's what they've been. You know, that's the way they try to. That's the way they move.
Yeah. Just make this point real quick. You made me think about the one of the shorts I just put out the other day about Anthony Johnson, the first black person to introduce chattel slavery. He was an indentured servant who, when he gained his freedom, he said, well, the white man owns land the slaves. I want to own land the slaves because the white man own it, and trying to emulate the white society. But the organizations or what it means to be successful for black people, and it's really not even just in America, throughout the diaspora, the goal is whiteness. It has to resemble whiteness. It has to be the opulence that the white people deem as opulent. Because think about all of the black people who break themselves to have luxury brands, because the white people have the luxury brands. So now
I
go ahead.
really want, because you really tapped into something. I'm gonna leave some of this for Pat because I know Pat about to go in. But when you talk about in Africa, the fact that when their judicial system is set up the same way the European judicial system is, with them wearing powdered wigs, and having trials, not going back to the traditional ways, but emulating these Europeans. When you talk about the Pan Atlantic, it used to be the Pan Atlantic 8, now it's the Pan Atlantic 9. Well, what are they emulating? What are these fraternities emulating? Well, because white fraternities wouldn't let us in, we built black ones. Well, why did you feel the need? Jack and Jill, the Boule, all these different aspects of it, when the Boule is just a replica of Skull and Bone. So we get to see it over and over and over again. So I'm gonna leave it there because I know we have a lot more to cover in this particular. video.
So Pat, I want you to take inferiority complex from the angle of what Dr. Carter G. Woodson is talking about, because PC laid the groundwork of what inferiority complex is. But as far as inferiority complex being um, passed down from one generation to the next through the education system, let's talk about that. How are Black kids taught to be inferior?
It goes back. We're talking about cultural transmission and understanding what the education system actually is. It's a system of indoctrination. It's a system of inculcation that like, and that's not a bad thing. Like, we need people to understand that's not a bad thing. That's what all education systems are. Even if we created our own education system,
You're doing the same
we
thing.
right, you're indoctrinating your children into your ways of thinking, being, and existing. Um, under the belief and assumption that your ways of thinking, being, and existing are what's best for you in the future, because they have been what's best for you in the past. Unless you're making an adjustment because you're a Black person in America and you finally understand it, what was happening in the past ain't what's best for you no more. So you got to do something new. But that's neither here nor there. Um, so when you send your kid into the education system, most of us unwittingly, we don't have any malice when we're doing it. We're thinking we're doing what's best for our kids. Like, you hear people now, you got to teach the classics, something like that, right? You got to teach the classic. You got to teach Homer. You got to teach
Shakespeare.
right, Shakespeare. You got to teach these pieces that are considered the classics, because kids need to know that to get into college. And then when they go to college, they need to learn other things that further drive them away from the things that they might need to understand in order to be a benefit to their race. And what you end up having now is a child that was never taught to appreciate themselves, appreciate people that look like them, or to truly understand and appreciate the contributions that they've made to society. And like we talked about in the last show, if you don't actively teach Black children, if you don't actively teach children, period, not to be racist in America, they're going to be racist in America. That's what's going to happen. And so I think one of the things that Dr. Carter G. Woodson is really trying to get people to understand is that if you don't take a proactive approach to educating Black children about the contributions, the beauty, and the necessity for Black thought and Black progression, intentional Black thought and Black progression, then you're creating a situation where Black people are going to continue to be in a position of inferiority, because everything else that's being poured into them puts them in a position of having a weak hand. And it goes back to something we're always saying, right? Like, Black people have got to be proactive about the things we do. I'm not going to sit here and say everything white people do is negative. There are a lot of things we could take from white people and use it to be beneficial to us. But it's not a direct take. It's got to be altered some kind of way. That's where the thought comes in. If you're a Black person and you want to start a business, there's nothing wrong with studying white businesses to figure out how they've been successful. The problem comes in when you try to duplicate one-to-one everything that Black business, that white business, and this is the problem we have, because like PC pointed out and like you pointed out, every single time Black people decide they need something, it's a one-to-one taking. White people won't let us into their club. Fine, we'll start our own club, the Divine Nine. Like, ain't nothing divine about y'all. Y'all are copycats. You know what I'm saying? White people won't let us play their sports. We're going to start our own sports leagues. Okay, what are we going to do different? Absolutely nothing. We're going to do it just like they do it. Oh, okay. You know, we're gonna start our own schools. Okay, what's gonna be different about our schools? We're gonna teach pro-black stuff, right? No, we're gonna teach the same thing they do. We're just gonna have black teachers teaching black students the same white indoctrination. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, that should work. Great.
So
Yeah.
I might be making up a word here.
All words
But
are made
you,
up.
hey,
Authority.
but what you talk about, Pat, though, is okay. Black people who believe that they belong in white circles were rejected from these white circles, a la Kanye West. That just recently happened, not too long ago. So in turn, they created their own version of these white organizations, these black ran organizations that were created with the white mind. And then within these black organizations, intra-inferiority was happening because or the superiority complex of some black people over the others, because we getting into that. That's the part we're gonna get into this. But that inferiority complex that's being passed down or that's being created in the environment, in an all black environment. So other black people are making black people feel inferior because I'm a part of this and you're not a part of this. So therefore I am better than you because I'm a part of this organization that resembles this white organization. And therefore we are separated. We are not the same. I can't see you as my brother. I can't see you as my sister. Even trickle down to what a lot of things that we see today, like PC was saying. If you're not a white collar worker, if you don't have a master's, a bachelor's, a PhD, if you are not in these organizations, then you are not worthy of my attention. You're not worthy of my presence. That's insanity at its finest. I know, because think about it. These are the same people who would complain about white people not allowing them in their spaces, then turn around and do that to other black people.
Absolutely.
And it's because now I have the opportunity to do this. So my miseducated self is going to take the opportunity to do the same thing, because that's a part of the mimicking of white people. I have to mimic this oppression. I have to mimic oppression because I can't really oppress you. So I have to do as much as I can. So I can stop you from being in this organization. You know, so that's the niggatry that goes into it.